Hello, everyone. My name is Emma Oswald, and welcome back to the December 17th version of the lecture series. This month, we have an amazing scientist, Dr. Karen Andeen, from Marquette University. And without further ado,
Hi, so sorry, I think I'm not muted. I hope that's correct. So I'm Dr. Andeen, and I'm at Marquette University, like she said. I am, just a little introduction, I'm from the Chicago area. I grew up in the suburbs, and I went to college at a small liberal arts college called Augustana College in Western Illinois. And then I went to grad school in Madison at UW-Madison, which is a great town, fantastic program. In Madison, I got my PhD in astroparticle physics. And I also met my husband on the first day of our program. He's in the same physics program that I was in. And so when we graduated, we got married, and then we moved to the East Coast for a year. And then we moved to the Franco-Swiss border for a year, and we worked at the big particle accelerator there called the LHC outside Geneva. And then we moved here to Marquette. So we both are professors in the same department. He works down the hall from me. And we have two little boys. One is 3.5, which means a little bit 3 and a little bit 4, as he will tell you. And one is just turned 9 months old. So that's our lives. And amongst all of it, we're both physicists. So I'm an astroparticle physicist. I work on an experiment called the IceCube Neutrino Observatory, and I'm going to give you a little talk about that right now. So let me share my screen. Okay. So, I titled the talk Studying Cosmic Rays at the South Pole. And this is a picture of the Earth. And what you see here is a cosmic ray that comes in and hits the Earth's atmosphere and basically shatters into a number of smaller particles. So, but I think we need to talk about what cosmic rays are. So first, what is a ray? Maybe you learned this in class, I'm not sure. But when we talk about rays in physics, it's not the same as a ray in mathematics. You know, in mathematics, you have the ray, and it's like an arrow with an arrow, and it means a direction. In physics, the term ray and radiation are used interchangeably. So the real question is, what's radiation? That's maybe a more familiar term. So what do people think of when they think of radiation? Usually I ask this question interactively, but I can't see you guys. So what's radiation? A lot of times people think of this radiation symbol, and usually it's accompanied by block letters, radiation, scary, scary in the movies, and like alarms going off, right? Okay, so that's one impression of radiation. And this is another thing people think of. People think of, oh, the atomic bomb. So this is one of the bomb tests on the Bikini Atoll from 1954. And it looks very scary. This is much less scary. This is radiation therapy for cancer treatment. So radiation isn't just scary stuff. It's also good things, useful things, healing things. Also, this is a nuclear power plant, and so people affiliate nuclear power plants with radiation, but nuclear power plants provide power to a significant portion of the world. So that's great. We like power. We like our electricity. Radiation X-rays are an example of radiation. So see, we're using the word ray and radiation at the same time, right? X-rays you use to look at your hand. And isn't that great? Because if you break your finger, you kind of want to know what's going on. So, so there's really positive things that can be associated with radiation. How about the sun? The sun is another form, sunlight is another form of radiation, right? So we talk all about UVA, UVB, rays, right? This is radiation. But sunlight grows your plants. Without sunlight, everything would die. So sunlight is a wonderful thing. Radiation is a wonderful thing if used properly. So it's everywhere. Radiation is everywhere. And radiation is just energized particles coming from any source at all. Anything at all. And you yourself, you emit radiation. So what is the word cosmic? This is one we hear all the time, right? Oh, it's cosmic. Okay, well, cosmic in physics terms means relating to the universe or cosmos, especially as distinct from the Earth, as in things from not on Earth, anything from anywhere but Earth. So cosmic rays are energetic or radioactive particles, not from Earth, from outer space. So one thing people immediately jump to is the aurora borealis or the aurora australis. This is cosmic rays hitting our atmosphere, and we create this sort of pattern due to magnetic fields around the Earth. But you know what? Just look up at your night sky. All of these stars you see, these are stars that are emitting photons. Photons are a type of cosmic ray. They're a particle, and they are coming to us on Earth from their source, which is the source would be the star. So I'm trying to introduce some words here, right? Like source is the star, and photons are the particles, and they're being emitted. So here's traditional astronomy is using photons, these particles, as a messenger. The telescope is then used to magnify the image made by the photons, and your eyes are photon detectors, and your brain is a signal processor, right? It's like a fancy computer. So this is what a typical telescope looks like. And a telescope can be used for visible light or X-rays or gamma rays, and we can look at the universe in all of those. So, and I forgot, I'm sorry. So there's the drum roll, and the photons are emitted. You see them through the telescope. Your eye absorbs them, and your brain processes the signal and says, aha, I see the Crab Nebula. Great. So light waves come in all different wavelengths. That's really useful. So we have an MRI image here, an X-ray image, an infrared image, optical image, even an artist image. Okay, that's not a different wavelength, but you learn different things about your hand every time we look at your hands in a different wavelength. You see the muscles or the bones or the heat being emitted. So it's really important to be able to understand, to get a clear picture of your hand, of what's happening in your hand. It's really important to look at all these different wavelengths. And the artist's image tells us something too. That one tells us maybe something about love or caring. So that's an emotion that isn't even expressed in the other images. Well, look, so we can look at the universe in different wavelengths as well. So this is an example of the Crab Nebula. And the optical image is here at the bottom left. And it doesn't look like anything super spectacular, maybe, I mean, to me. But you look in radio and you see, oh, there's hot spots that you don't see at all in the optical image. What's going on there?
I'm very sorry. It seems like your screen share is not working right now. Do you want to try taking it off for a second? We can't see your slides.
Yes. Oh, no. When did it stop?
Okay, so it's right towards the beginning, but it's okay. We heard everything fine, so very sorry about that.
Shoot. Okay, let's try again. Okay, so do you want to have should I start again or should I just keep going?
You can keep going. That's perfectly fine. We heard everything, so.
Okay. Oh yes, so here we have the Crab Nebula, and down here the bottom left is the optical image. And like I said, you don't see the same things in each wavelength. So the top left is a radio image, and you see hot spots that you wouldn't have seen in the optical image. In the ultraviolet image, you see something completely different. And in the X-ray image here on the bottom right, you see something that looks like this kind of swirling mass and these jets shooting out, which is really cool. So you start to understand or get a different picture of this source, this Crab Nebula, by looking at it in different wavelengths. So that's cool, and we can look at things in all of these different wavelengths. So I want you to ask yourselves this question. I want you to commit to an answer. So normally I have people raise hands when I ask this question, but I want you to raise your hands anyway. Raise your hands to yourself. True or false? Sometimes 1 inch of matter is enough to stop a photon. So raise your hand if you think the answer is yes. Raise your right hand if you think the answer is no. Raise your left hand. So think about it for a second. 1 inch of matter is enough to stop a photon. Okay, so the answer is true. A photon is just a light particle. If you just cover your eyes, all the light particles are blocked. So what does that mean for astronomy that uses photons? It means if there's something in the way, so this is back, you maybe didn't see this one earlier.
I'm very sorry to interrupt again, but it's still not showing the slides as you are moving along. I don't know, do you have it on present mode?
Yes, I do, but maybe here, can you see it now?
Yes, now I can see it moving.
Okay, so maybe the present mode is just not working at all.
All right.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Sorry, continue.
That's okay. So can we try one more time? Let's try this. Can you see that?
No, I cannot.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, that's too bad. There's some animations that aren't going to show up, but that's okay. So we'll go like this. Yeah, there's a couple things that are maybe a little bit important, but that's okay. We'll do our best. Okay, so traditional astronomy uses the photons as messengers. And what happens is that space is not empty. So if you're using photons, which are these light particles, and light particles can be stopped by something as thin as your hand, imagine what happens if there's a planet in the way, or a dust cloud, or a galaxy in the way of what you want to see. Well, you're out of luck, right? There's nothing you can do. So what we need is a different type of messenger. So gamma rays, photons, are absorbed when anything gets in the way, in yellow. Charged cosmic rays are these green ones, and they are charged, so they bounce around in the magnetic field of the universe. There's tons of them, but they bounce around all over the place, so they don't point back to where they come from. But neutrinos, in red, they point back to where they come from, just like photons. And they can pass through anything, which is really, really useful to study. So we have just started kind of a new era of neutrino astronomy. So, and this was just another animation, but it's not going to work anyway. So on IceCube, we use neutrinos. IceCube is the name of my telescope. So, and they pass through anything. But here's the question. If they pass through anything, how do you detect them? If you can't see them anyhow, if they pass through everything and don't interact, how do you detect them? So for example, think about your thumbnail. 65 billion neutrinos go through your thumbnail every second. In 100 years, a single neutrino might interact with your body. That's it, just one might interact. And in order to see something, you need an interaction. So wait a minute, so if neutrinos rarely interact, they also rarely interact with your detector. So how do you see them? How can we possibly see them? So you need a really, really big detector. That's the answer, because if your detector is the size of your body, then it will take you 100 years to see one particle. And one particle is not enough to look at anything useful. So what we do is we build a very big detector, and then we have to think about what it is that we need to see. So if a neutrino interacts, it produces very energetic charged particles that move super fast. So what happens when things move super fast? Well, think about a jet in the sky. Jets in the sky can produce sonic booms. I don't know how many of you have heard one, but we have jets that come over for the Chicago Air and Water Show and the Milwaukee Air and Water Show. If you've ever had them flying over your house, you've probably heard a sonic boom. They are really loud. But when particles move super fast, we get almost exactly the same thing. It's just that it's an optical effect rather than a sonic effect. So you get an optical boom instead of a sonic boom. And that optical boom is basically a cone of blue light that shoots out behind your particle. So, and I'll show you, and it's this blue light like in the picture on the right. That's actually in a nuclear reactor, and that is the color of the light we're looking for. So we need to be able to have a huge detector, and that huge detector needs to be able to detect blue light that looks like this one on the right. Okay, so those are our detectors. Our requirements. Another requirement is that we have to have something that's cheap. So I've been asked before, well, why not build a huge plastic telescope? And the answer is, well, that's actually kind of expensive. We need such a large amount of material that we have to have something that already exists. And it has to be transparent. So we have a couple options. We have water, air, and ice. So let's start with air. Air is, kind of the most obvious. You build a detector, you put it in, somewhere like the desert. Okay, so problems with air are that our detector has to be so big that you need kind of a kilometer cubed in order to have a chance of seeing enough neutrinos to make any sort of argument that you see anything. So, and if you have a kilometer cubed of air, that's already invading kind of airspace where airplanes might fly. Birds might want to go there. There's things like winds and storms, and it gets dark at night. And we want it to be dark all the time, so we don't want it to be dark only at night. Okay, so then there's water. Well, water's dark all the time. That's good. But water also moves. Water has fish. And there are experiments that have used the water, but it's not as convenient as one might hope. So our experiment, our telescope, is built actually in the ice. And it's in the ice at the South Pole. In fact, it's right here. So this is a pretty aerial shot of the South Pole. On the left, you have the South Pole Station, and the South Pole Station is actually at the geographic South Pole. There's a skiway or a runway where the airplanes land. And then to the right is the hexagonal shape. This blue shape is where IceCube is deployed, but it's deployed under the ice. So here's just a couple of photos for fun. I got to go down there and help build this experiment as a graduate student in Madison. This is the arrival terminal. That's the type of plane you arrive on. It's an Air Force plane. And this is a picture this is right in front of the South Pole Station. So the station is nice. That's one of the reasons we built our experiment at the pole itself, because there's a really nice base there. That infrastructure already existed. You wouldn't want to have to live in tents in the middle of nowhere while you build your experiment. So that's me in the Vanna White. Here's the South Pole mode. Okay, so the IceCube Neutrino Observatory is at the South Pole, and it's 88 strings. So, and when I say strings, I mean kind of like a string of pearls. So 88 strings deployed in holes that we had to drill. So kind of we use a hot water, basically you point a hot water jet at the ice face down with a specially designed drill head and point it at the ice and let it just drill down a kilometer or a mile and a half. And then you pull the drill out, and then you drop your string of eyeballs or detectors into the hole. So in this picture on the right is a diagram of what it looks like. So there's a mile and a half hole, and the detectors are only instrumenting about half a mile, a little over half a mile of that, this deeper part of the picture. And in total, we have a kilometer by a kilometer by a kilometer in depth of detectors deployed deep in the ice down there. And that's why we call it IceCube. So the reason we deployed it so deep is because the deeper ice is clearer. And the deeper ice is clearer because there's a lot of pressure from the ice on top of it that pushed out all the air bubbles. So as you go higher and higher up in the ice toward the surface, there's more and more air bubbles. And then there's kind of this firn layer, which is more like compacted snow. So the clearest ice is the deepest ice. So that's why we want to go all the way down as far as we can, as close to the continent, the bedrock, as we can. So, and this project currently has about 400 scientists and engineers at 48 institutes around the world. So it's a very international group. It's a very large experiment. And it's really, really fun. So that's the telescope that we're using. It's the IceCube Neutrino Observatory. Now what happens is that a neutrino will come in, and if it happens to interact, so remember I said one neutrino interacts with your body every 100 years. So if a neutrino happens to interact with an air molecule or an ice molecule, then there's a nuclear interaction, and a smaller particle or a different particle called a muon, or maybe a tau, or maybe an electron. The electron, the muon, and the tau are all very similar. So a muon is just a heavy electron. Will shoot out, and that particle is going faster than the speed of light in ice. So that's like I was talking about earlier, you get this kind of sonic boom. Well, here you get this optical boom, this Cherenkov effect, this blue cone of light that goes shooting through the ice behind the muon that's passing through the detector. So then you see all of the light that gets created in our little eyeballs. We call them optical modules, and I'll show you what they look like on the next slide. So every little sphere there is an optical module, and there's about 5,500 in total. This is what they look like. They're our eyes, they're optical modules. In the bottom, you have something called a photomultiplier tube. And just for reference, that's about 10 inches across. So it's kind of the size of a basketball. And it's a lot heavier than a basketball. It's about, what did I decide? I think they're about 20 pounds each. Anyway, so the photomultiplier tubes are kind of like a reverse light bulb. So light bulbs, you flip the switch, electricity goes through, and boom, they make light, right? The photomultiplier tube sees light and converts that light into an electrical signal. So that electrical signal is then amplified and read out by a little computer. So this is a mainboard computer. So these optical modules, we call them DOMs, digital optical modules, are the equivalent of our eyeballs in a normal telescope. So you look at your telescope and look at the sky, and the DOMs are the eyeball and the brain right there. Okay, so we use all of those things to collect our data. And this is an example of an event. Now tell me, please, Emma, if this doesn't show up properly. So there's the hits in the surface and then more hits in the ice. I hope you guys can see that.
It looks all good.
Okay, good. So that's an example of what happens when a particle comes through our detector. Our detector lights up and says, hey, every little optical module says, hey, I see something. I saw light at this time, and I saw this much light. So the timing is the colors. So the earliest hits are the red, and the later hits are blue. And then here's another, I'll play it again. And the size of the circle, so some of them are really quite large, that's how much light it saw. So if it sees lots of light, then you get a big circle, and if it sees just a little light, it gets a small circle. So what we actually see in our data is just numbers of photons seen. But what we see in we call this our event display. So we can look at events as they come through our detector. And this is a way to imagine where the particles are coming from. So you can see that we can track where the direction of the particle, where it's pointing to, which means that we can figure out where it's pointing in the sky also. Okay, so that's fun. So what do we see with our Neutrino Telescope? So I'm going to show you, I'm going to reorder these slides really quickly because there's an animation that is not going to work. Okay, so this slide shows you basically our view of the universe in all these different types of wavelengths of light, and then finally in the middle in neutrinos. So the top one is in infrared and optical. I'm just going to zoom this so you can see it better, because this is what you're familiar with. This is what the sky looks like at night. And that's the Milky Way galaxy in the middle. That's our home. That's the galactic center that it's pointing to. So I'll just put that back where it was. And we're looking in exactly the same place in all of these other wavelengths. And you can see in gamma rays here, it's really exciting. There's a lot of stuff going on. In X-rays, you see there's also many things happening. Radio and microwaves, we don't see this kind of hotspots right at the galactic center. So that's interesting. And in neutrinos, this is what we see. So I'm going to zoom in. That's the next one I'm going to show you in big sky map. We call these sky maps. And you can see there's not that many events. So every little X here, or plus, is where we've seen a high energy neutrino. And there's not so many yet. So we don't have a pretty picture like you have in radio, microwave, or X-rays, or infrared, or gamma rays. But one day, we will. And what we hope to see, but even before we have that, we hope to see a lot of events coming from kind of the same places. Because what we really want to know is what in our universe creates neutrinos? Where are they coming from? Because we have some ideas, some theories about where they're coming from, but we're not sure if they're right. And if we're right, then that means one thing, and if we're wrong, that means another. So, for example, we think that maybe neutrinos are coming from black holes, produced in black holes, but we're not sure. So we hope to find out. So if we see a collection of neutrino events pointing back to, say, a black hole that we know is a black hole, then we're learning something more about the black hole that we didn't know before. So that's why we study these things. So now the question is, how do you complete the sky map? There's all these white spaces that don't have events. How do we get the pretty picture like everybody else has, right? And the answer is you wait. So a lot of science is a waiting game. You wait and see what you can see. So right now, this is what we have, and we plan to just wait and keep taking data. This was, I believe this was 3 years of data. But another way to get more events is to build a bigger detector. So hopefully coming soon to a South Pole near you is IceCube Gen 2. So now that we've shown that it works, we can detect neutrinos coming from extragalactic sources, then we're hoping that that will help us get funding from the federal government to expand our detectors. So the red here in this picture, pinky red, is the IceCube as it exists right now. And the blue is one imagined version of an expanded array. So basically, we're taking over all of Antarctica. That's the goal. So because we want a new view of the sky, just like with your hand, you get a new view, you learn new things, and that's important. So, okay, so what should you take away from this? Neutrino physics is a new field. It's something that we haven't been able to, it's a way to look at the sky that we haven't been able to use before. Because they interact so rarely, it took a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of technological advances to get to the point where we can say, we even see these few events. So we're really proud of the work we've done, but there's tons of work still to do, and it's going to take a long time. But it's fun, and you get to go cool places. And you guys can get involved. So you should think about neutrino physics when you're thinking about career options. And I also included for you a poem by John Updike called Cosmic Gall. He actually wrote a poem about neutrinos. And I'll read it to you just because you might not be able to get a chance to read it. Neutrinos, they are very small. They have no charge. They have no mass. They do not interact at all. The Earth is just a silly ball to them through which they simply pass like dustmates down a drafty hall or photons through a sheet of glass. They snub the most exquisite gas, ignore the most substantial wall, cold shoulders, steel, and sounding brass insult the stallion in his stall, and, scorning barriers of class, infiltrate you and me. Like tall and painless guillotines, they fall down through our heads into the grass. At night they enter at Nepal and pierce the lover and his lass from underneath the bed. You call it wonderful, I call it crass. So it's not entirely correct. Neutrinos have very little mass, and they occasionally do interact, which is why we can study them. So thank you. This is my one of my favorite pictures of the South Pole, a nice aerial view. So thanks for listening. And Emma tells me that if you guys have questions, she can tell me. So.
Absolutely. If anybody has any questions for Dr. Andeen or for the Science Squad, you can ask them now or email us later at thescisquad@gmail.com. Yeah, so thank you for giving a lecture for us today, and it was really enjoyable.
Good. I'm sorry that the presentation didn't work for half the time. That's really surprising. So.
All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions for now. So until next time, guys.
Thanks for joining.